Hello there everyone and welcome back. It's time to continue on my endeavor to try and reach legendary rank with the Imperial Navy, and I made a couple tweaks to this Lance Heavy variant, or at least the fleet I've been utilizing. And hell, I even have a couple other fleets to experiment with, which hopefully we will get to see on my run through for Imperial Navy. But the simple tweak I made was cut out the Apocalypse, even though I will admit I am incredibly biased towards this ship because Novacans were probably one of my favorite weapons in Armada 1. The downside though is the Dominators, which I would love to use more, don't synergize the best because the Novacans are best at destroying the hull, but the Macrocans, which are really good at taking down the shields, have incredibly short range. So this is kind of the antithesis, if I even pronounce that properly, of an optimal ship, or at least the synergies anyway. They kind of are counterintuitive, alas. And the Apocalypse does help with that to a limited extent since its weaponry is already long range. And it has 4 charges of Novacans, so you can't scoff at that. And this ship has been incredibly useful against Eldari. If you've seen a handful of the streams that I used to do way back when, you would know that it does work. If it requires them burning the Wraithbone ship for me to reliably hit with the Novacan, but it does have some merit there as opposed to trying to hit him with torpedoes at least. But I might go back to that over time, but this is the idea I have here, and hell, if I really want to, I could cut out the Dictator for a 5th Armageddon, but I don't like that because then it leaves me with no fighters to deal with heavy bombers, let alone the Seeker missiles of the Tau Empire. That's always a threat there, since it gives the fighters even more power to just distract my point defense. So we'll stick with this for now and see how it is, and for other fleets, I am going to have to refine maybe this standard Macrocan fleet I have here. It's already been edited, it looks like, since I used to have a Grand Cruiser Exorcist as opposed to a Dictator. But this one I'm planning on experimenting with. I like the idea of the Overlord, sure. They're technically still the same kind of cruisers, but hell, they're a lot more resilient to critical hits. They actually have more troops, don't they? Just barely noticeable, so that's not a worthwhile factor. And they do have a good amount of long-range weaponry for when I have to face off against Orks or anything that at least wants to get in close to me. So I like it for the versatility there. Only thing I don't like is how fragile these 2 frigates are, so I'm going to have to fine-tune this a bit. Or maybe downgrade an Overlord. That's also a possibility, maybe. But that's what I'm thinking for now. In the meantime, we'll give this a test run and see if it bites me in the ass or not. Okay, match number 1, we're straight up face off against Orks yet again, although I guess a lot of it has to do with the sheer amount of Ork matches I'm having in that they at least on paper look like the most simplest to control. In this case, my opponent's going incredibly top heavy, not even going the Mega Cannon route, but they are going to be utilizing what? 2 battleships with the 5 hangar bays, and the battleship version of the rocks, the super heavy rock. I forget what it technically is called, but they are definitely top heavy and they're going to be sporting a lot of durability. And with the sheer amount of fighter bays, just keep in mind those fighters can also do damage to my hull, provided they are not distracted and are able to stay on my ship for that period of time. And when I have a Dictator, and if I'm willing to expend my torpedoes to kind of distract them one by one, those fighters can very easily be distracted, or at least not do the damage necessary. Only thing I'm not sure about if I were to go the torpedo route is if it would burn through the 90-second engagement window that the fighters are supposed to do before they recall back on their own. That's the only thing I'm uncertain of, if I'm just prolonging the amount of time they have to shoot at me, or if it does burn into that clock, which would be really damn convenient, especially since I have 6 charges to my dang torpedoes after all. So, you think I should get use out of them, even if they're ultimately not going to do any damage for me. At least it might help in negating a lot of damage for me. Potentially. Although with how expensive the Ork battleships with the fighter bays is, it's not like they can get a lot of that. Hell, I think they can only field 3 of those battleships, unless they want to go lighter with maybe the 2 hangar bay type of cruisers. In which case they're going to have a hard time getting a lot of fighter bays that way, regardless. So I suppose it doesn't make too much difference, it's just a question of durability, number of ships, and of course the health. Ship ready. And right off the bat, we see only a small number of blips, which is kind of not what we're used to seeing. although I did hear a fighter bay. I don't know if you heard it there due to my commentary and the fact that the game audio is slightly quieter on your end, but there was the audio cue to signify there were fighters being launched. So I kind of know what to expect here, to an extent. And hell, I'm trying to remember, was the rock out in the open there or was it high in an asteroid belt? I want to say it's the one right next to the battleship there, but I could be mistaken come to think of it. Either way, you would think that if I could deflect those fighters, I should be in really good shape. Because mega cannons, the massive cruisers with the torpedoes haven't worked, so you think I should be able to deal with fighters quite well, right? Although, if they were to somehow launch their boarding assault boats, then that could be a big problem for at least the ship that gets boarded by them. Just use one battleship to maybe launch the fighters, at least distract the point defense, and the second one gets what? A grand total of 20 boarding assaults, I want? No, it can't be 20. I want to say 10 boarding assaults just for a battleship there. I want to think anyway, since I'm assuming every squadron has only 2 assault ships, unless you're playing with Tyranids or maybe the Impalers or the Drukhari. And there's the distraction techniques I was kind of hinting at before. Just fire torpedoes, and the fighters don't even get a chance to do more hull damage to me. Which works out great here because I practically, well, I think I kill it off. No, it just gets out of range. I had the point defense to at least scare one of them off, if nothing else. And really, that probably helps me more that I managed to safely get out, because once that's shot down, my opponent can launch another squadron immediately if they so wish. And that was not what I was intending. I think I got an actual torpedo hit there as well. I think I may have launched Meltas, but either way. I wasn't expecting a hit, but I did aim it towards the battleship, if I'm remembering correctly. I just realistically wasn't expecting it to connect. It didn't sound like it connected unless it was a melted torpedo, which we'll have no way to know unless we reveal them. Or at least until we reveal them. And there's the reveal. Well, we kind of already knew this. That one was also a carrier battleship, since we had 2 squadrons to deal with after all. I just did a terrible job aiming my fighters apparently. I thought I clicked on the blip, but no, they decided to go to the empty area space where I target them, so now we are not going to reveal the ship and get our free shots in, which would be amazing for the situation. Outside the Novacan shot that they're utilizing, we only have this battleship kind of by itself, which is why I would have loved to maximize the amount of damage I could have done on it. And from the looks of it, no, it didn't suffer a melted torpedo hit, unless they immediately repaired. But again, it's like I said, we're getting free damage here, and if all these shots are hitting the rear, which keep in mind have 25 armor, I think, we should be able to do a lot, not 25, but 50 armor. I can't remember if that's the case or not. It used to be 50 armor for the Armada 1 battleships, but Orks generally had the 50 armor. Well, now I'm confusing Armada 1 and Armada 2. What I'm saying is the armor is weakest on the rear, and I'm hoping I'm getting full value out of these shots right now to compound this one little advantage I have. It's just a shame I had to miss with the stasis bomb, because now it's hindering me more than helping a little bit. And with the boost, I am preparing myself for a very vicious torpedo assault. I just need a window to fire them, all the while having to deal again with these dang Novacans, which thankfully haven't been too terrifying just yet, but once several of them connect, then I'm going to start taking hull damage. Although they still have to get through the shields, which is the main benefit of having these shields up. And even then, I think the one on the right there took 3 Novacans, which still managed to get through the hull really damn well. The Ork Novacan is still vicious. Maybe not practical with how it scatters, but damn vicious if it ever connects properly. And right off the bat, 5 fire assaults, plasma bomb, mutiny. This is looking good for me. It's looking good anyway, but with that boarding assault, I think my flagship's going to lose a good portion of its crew there. Not quite enough to be into the light casualty step. And with the 3rd Novacan shot, I am forced to try evade. And thankfully, well, one of my ships took the brunt of the damage there. They are being softened up, so it's just a matter of if my opponent can take advantage of these. Which Okay, they're lobbing torpedoes. I'm pretty certain these are just boarding torpedoes though. So nothing too scary here, but hell, actually I'm just realizing if they hit the flagship, they are going to cause some critical hit damage. If only a little bit. And in this case, it actually took out my engines, which is going to suck. So how I feel to justify this wrong? Fire a salvo of melted torpedoes at them, although I don't know if that was a mistake on my part or not, because they could have easily repaired. I can't remember if there was a rally, or if there was a tail that allowed me the freedom to fire this without it easily being negated. But the rocks are in place. Sadly, I did not use my lightning strike on the flagship to get the morale damage on the rocks I would have liked. So that was a bit of a whiff there, because I think at the morale it's currently at, that would have caused a mutiny and easily killed off 20 of the crew there. It would have made my life a lot easier dealing with this rock, because keep in mind, those things are immune to critical hits outside of like the critical hits that are caused from troop casualties or the melted torpedoes specifically. And you can see just how miraculously these torpedoes, especially the melted torpedoes, are working right now. This flagship is basically out of the fight right now with its deck gone. And this rock is at the point where, yeah, if it breaks again, it's just out of the fight. It was scary. I'm about to lose, what is it, my second battleship there, or not battleship, but battle cruiser. But this match is pretty much won, thankfully. The moral of the story of these Ork matches is morale. The morale damage in general is basically making this work incredibly well for me. Since I'm not really the best equipped for fighting Orks in close, even if my lances and turrets are pretty damn effective at softening them up at range. But as we can see, I'm winning more through the morale damage as opposed to anything else. It's just a nice treat to see the rocks, because in all honesty, I do like the rocks a lot. It's just a question of where they ultimately fit. And the only justification I can have for them, at least in my Ork fleets, is to kind of have them take the brunt of the damage due to their immunity to critical hits. And on top of the 83 armor they have all around, that could be really useful as well, if executed properly. Okay, this is going to be a very interesting match to go up against, for we're dealing with the 4-stig type of Chaos Fleet. And they also have the Wind of Change, which is going to help them a lot in trying to at least deny me my long-range shots as I try and chase down my opponent. They are going to be running away from me, as opposed to this spoiler match we had before. This is going to be a different contrast to what we've seen. And technically the same kind of firepower with what? 16 fighter squadrons? As opposed to, I think with the Devastation, I think that was the one cruiser that was with those despoilers. We're looking at, like I said, 16 fighter squadrons versus 18 for the battleships. So it's not that much more weaker, it's just spread out evenly among all the fighter squadrons. So, in truth, I'm just gonna, once I realize these are stigs, I'm gonna need to get amazing value out of my dictator, and hopefully my opponent kind of waste a lot of their fighters and bombers quite recklessly, since they only have 3 charges after all, as opposed to 4 that the battleships have. So that extra charge could make all the difference with how my opponent is going to be running away from me constantly. Otherwise, I'm going to be sticking with my routine, and thankfully, at least I am well equipped to at least deal with a fleet that's running from me constantly, since these dorsal turrets have at least the max range possible. With me switching over to brace for impact though, I'm not going to have the convenience of shooting them at max range. So I am going to want to chase them kind of consistently, especially if I want my broadside weaponry to have a chance to fire as well. I don't honestly expect the macro cannons to do a lot of damage. Hell, since I am going to be chasing after them, just the broadside weaponry in general is going to have a hard time getting any real shots off, outside the periodic attempts when I'm trying to cut them off, especially maybe when they get to the side of the map, since that tends to be what happens when you chase after your opponent. Although, with this gas cloud in the middle, it's entirely possible, if I'm comfortable with my with their, what is it, their lack of frigates, it's possible I could have just hung in that gas cloud too in retrospect, but I am going to be trying to pursue this opponent as much as I can. And right off the bat, I kind of suspect maybe they're Grand Cruisers, as I did prioritize their generator when I start up this match. But we're going to know pretty quickly that these are Stigs, and I'm going to change to trying to shoot down their engines. But for now, I got frigates. I'm going to push my way through the middle, as per usual anyway, and I do have the gas clouds to help. Now I'm just waiting for any kind of sign that I know what I'm up against, since there's not really a whole lot to do in this downtime, is there? I'm not like Eldari where I can immediately boost to grab these objectives and start positioning myself. And there's the tell we need. In truth, I kind of was wondering for a brief period if these were despoilers, because I think the spoiler blips still show them as 4 fighter squadrons as opposed to 5. But when we see the 4 separate squads, that at least confirms they're at least Stigs for me. So I'm just going to try and conceal what ships I can there. At the very least, minimize the loss of point defense, since these things can still weaken me for later on, if I get a little careless. And with the convenience of this gas cloud being here, I might as well take advantage of it. Not going to have that opportunity for all the other ships. But switch to brace for impact. I even have these 2 firestorms contribute in this. They're not solid running, but I want to maximize the amount of point defense I have, and even counterplaying if I should launch the fighters or not, since they aren't going to live very long, it's safe to say. Especially with this one fighter squadron here getting shot down. And thankfully the point defense are working relatively well. I think we already destroyed 3 of their squadrons. And the last one's being... no, I recalled my fighters, and their squadron did kill off my first charge. So if I'm not careful, I could have a lot of problems if I lose all 3 of those fighter squadrons still. But thankfully, I am conveniently in a gas cloud, so I'm easily going to block and deflect this one attack here. Although we're only going to get 1 bomber squadron. Or actually, I take that back, 2. I thought that all of them basically recalled immediately after. But now that I have them marked, they're in range, I'm going to see what damage I can get here. But since they are so carrier focused, there's not like any real need for them to face their broadside to me, since the lances are pretty much doing almost no damage to me at all, and I pretty comfortably dodged this first stasis bomb. Keep in mind, that also has only 3 charges as opposed to the spoiler with its 4. But my shields are just now going down on 1 cruiser, and with almost no hull damage at that, so I'm in comfortable shape here. And I think I just damaged the engine there. I think, yeah, the engine was damaged, so that's going to force a repair on this ship. It's a good thing they kind of delayed that, because a lot of times, I'm sure you can understand the sentiment, you would burn that emergency repair immediately, but if my opponent had not been so patient, that Stig could have died immediately right there. That was 6 melted torpedoes, and I was incredibly close to run that thing down. So their patience paid off for him amazingly that time around, at least. It just cost them a lot of morale damage. And these bombers are going to hurt, but thankfully, Dictator catches 2 of them. I take a little bit of bombing damage, but it's not nearly as impactful as it could have been. Thank God. Since I think I shot that 1 squadron, the 2nd squad managed to get its bomb in, and the other 2 were picked off really easily. I just gotta remember what my fighters are doing. They're kind of... yeah, they're just hanging back there. Okay, just now I recalled them. I was a little bit worried about that. Since, like I said, it's going to be important for how this match is playing out. My opponent's running from me, and with my lack of broadside weaponry to contribute, it's basically my turrets versus their turrets, and bombers at that. And sadly, this is probably going to hurt a lot, since I think my fighters are still on cooldown. For the Dictator, hell, they haven't even docked yet. And with them recalling, they're not actually going to grab any of these bombers as well, so that was a very painful onslaught. A little more diligence and maybe just launching the fighters on a cruiser as opposed to a random area could have allowed me to deflect that a little bit better, because good God, look at the health on that cruiser right now, just from the bombers alone. Although, I'm still sniping a lot of these bombers down. I'm only getting maybe one squadron at a time, so it's not too impressive for trying to win this a game of attrition. But it is helping. And hell, I did launch fighters this time, and that snags that one bomber squadron. So ultimately, I feel like this comes down to just how well can I control my dictator versus how reckless my opponent wants to be with the bombers. Because so far, they've been launching all fighters or all bombers essentially, as I managed to deny their winds of change to kind of keep them from being concealed. Although I am not really paying attention to the objective the best, and even then, the score is nowhere close enough. And I panic a tiny bit here. I don't know if you ever see it, but I'm wondering where the hell my fighters are, and thankfully they grabbed the assault ships there. And my opponent does have the upgrades for, and at least the broadside boarding I think with the carrier bays. They at least have the Helldrake fighters, or whatever the heck that upgrade's called. So boarding damage is still pretty dangerous here, even with how effective the bombers have been so far. And now we're kind of getting wedged in a corner with their winds of change beams completely spent. I'm sadly going to be stuck inside the stasis bomb, but I think that's the third charge. It's the last one they have to yield, and I am in prime range to at least do a little bit of extra damage in. Return the favor, although if they launch bombers on me now, this cruiser's in a lot of trouble. So, with the boarding results alone maybe, if my opponent's smart enough to launch assault ships as opposed to bombers. Which they do that in a moment. Yeah, there they are. You see all these assault ships coming up now, and they are a little bit more fragile, but just the extra boarding damage to do them right now is enough to kill off the crew of that one cruiser, I believe. But thankfully, my opponent decides to kamikaze in, and they give up immediately. I was going to kill off that flagship. I missed the first time with one of the rams. The other one I think could have turned into it and got the killing blow, which would have probably snowballed in my favor amazingly, especially with how close range we were getting to. So it comes down to, well, I ultimately got close enough to be a real serious threat, but I wonder how many bombers actually managed to kill off through that attrition game, if they could have kept on fighting. Okay, match number 3, and we're going to be face off against Imperial Navy again, although this time my opponent is going ridiculous on the aggression and firepower potential, in that they are going 6 Avenger Grand Cruisers. And these are perhaps the most affordable Grand Cruisers in the game. Hell, I almost want to go so far as say they're almost as expensive as even the Tyrants almost. And they are incredibly impactful because of that. Think of what the macro cans on a regular cruiser can do, and basically just double that up with 2 additional macro cans on each side. The only downside for these Grand Cruisers is they don't have torpedoes, they don't have the 83 armor, so basically when I'm going to be trying to do my long and harass type damage, I'm going to be basically doing double the damage as opposed to if I were shooting at an Overlord or a Tyrant or hell even an Ork Cruiser for comparison's sake. So we're going to get to have ourselves a nice demonstration of how these two fleets can differ, since this is why I like this fleet in general, for when a close range engagement is not in my advantage, even if my opponent may not be using armor piercing rounds for this battle, since they are kind of a lower level fleet I'm pretty certain, and haven't quite upgraded that just yet, I do a world of damage, potentially up at long range, and with the stasis bomb to kind of help with that, I get to help dictate, or at least prepare them for when I get wedged into a corner, kind of similar to how the Stig fleet was before just a moment ago. And hell, with this beacon, excuse me there, with that beacon I just evade the objectives altogether. I'm just going to use my one little Cobra to grab the objective on the far left, and be kind of content with these 2 for the time being, once I grab the second one. Since the main theme of this from here on out is just engaging my opponent, soften them up as much as I can, realistically or best case situation, destroy their engines or generators right off the bat. Although I'm not aware that they're Grand Cruisers just yet, so I think I prioritize the shields first, since I don't have the convenience of the bugged out disruption overcharge to kind of keep their shields down for this match. So I do change that when I eventually reveal them, but for now, I could have probably took the window to fire some kind of torpedo salvo. It probably would not have done a whole lot, but the Avengers are now realized. 8 massive macro cannons on each side, and hell, I could be entirely wrong, but I think there may have been a brief period where the armor-piercing ammo was even bugged, where at least the Grand Cruisers were not benefiting from that upgrade. I know I at least made one comment for it before, way back when I was playing a different kind of Imperial Navy fleet with a Retribution, 3 Tyrants I think, and an Exorcist. I believe that's what my fleet composition was, and I noticed at one point that my Exorcist did not have the armor-piercing ammo to benefit for the macro cannons it did utilize. So that may have been fixed, I'm not entirely certain, but even if my opponent used armor-piercing ammo, that could not have taken effect, possibly. Either way, I'm preparing myself for the engagement. I'm trying to position my frigates in a way that they can actually contribute as well. Since all 3 of these are firestorms, so that's why I'm trying to put them in such an aggressive position right now. Not in the direct path of the Grand Cruisers, I would realistically like them to be able to at least shoot at them without fear of them getting rammed, or at least engaged, ideally. It's a little bit tricky to do since I'm kind of luring my opponent in that said direction after all. So easier said than done. But that's the attention there, so keep an eye on what those firestorms are doing. And immediately with the prompt to the combustion gauge, I just slow down my opponent by using a stasis bomb. It's kind of doing absolutely nothing, I will admit, but hey, it did prompt my opponent to not use the combustion gauge, allows the lances to fire back relatively freely, and even the macro cannons, so long as my opponent flies towards me, it's still probably going to do a little bit of damage. But I am relying almost exclusively on the lances to do the work here. As I prepare my own... Yeah, I did burn a little bit of my gauge, revealed myself, but I am currently out of their range right now, so even if they were to turn 9 degrees, I am safe from harm right now. And right now, we're doing some good damage. It's only temporary damage, but considering these things have ridiculous resilience, they cut the critical hit chance down to, was it 40% of what it would be? So I don't know what exactly the critical hit on my lances would be, but 10% chance of critical hit is basically a 4% chance instead. So I'm not getting these critical hits very often, so I am thankful when they do connect, especially after that one Grand Cruiser having to force a repair. And Disruption Bomb is great here, because then it resets the recharge on that one shield. If not, allows me to shoot at another Grand Cruiser if I feel there's no other need to shoot at anymore. But sadly, frigates have been refueled mainly due to the beacon, I think. So they're not doing nearly as much as they could have, but now the engine's gone that one middle Grand Cruiser. That thing is all but completely useless. It has no lock on to shoot at me, no engines to pursue me, so I just changed my target immediately. And hopefully use the stasis bomb to help give me some more breathing room. If not, just pin this thing in there right away. And what am I ultimately aiming for? Well, simply put, just kind of how the Stig player was doing in the last match, just maximizing as much damage as I can before I have to turn and engage. And this is probably my favorite aspect, I won't lie, with the Imperial Navy, especially if it's equipped properly for long-range fighting. Just firing and doing what damage you can before suddenly flipping it over on its head and being the aggressor. Because right now, 2 Grand Cruisers are incredibly crippled. Just now the engines and deck was repaired on the middle one and back. So this is looking amazingly for me, and now I'm going to turn to engage. Reload is now active to maximize my recharge, my torpedoes, and the macro cannons. And now we're going to see how quickly I could kill these things off. 1 Grand Cruiser is basically out. The flagship took a whirl to melt the torpedoes, and sadly, I would have loved that flagship, my flagship, to fire torpedoes, but I missed out an opportunity there. But the flagship's gonna ram everything as a nice bonus here regardless. Never mind the fact I may have just hit myself briefly, but I think that's an amazing engagement for me, despite the fact that their macro cannons are doing a world of damage to me right now. Part of it was due to my own ramming, of course, since I do take damage for ramming, even if I'm the aggressor, but still. Two of the Grand Cruisers are almost, pretty much essentially out. We got a mutiny on this one ship. And if I'm smart enough with my Kulex's assassin, I can easily take out another one. Really damn quickly. I just can't remember. Okay, there's the Kulex's assassin taking effect. Just gotta kill another ship or at least force that thing to mutiny. Ideally, when it's in the heavy casualty step. But now let's enjoy a double whammy of a ram. It's always satisfying, and it's why the cruisers in a lot of ways are probably the superior type of ships as opposed to the Grand Cruisers. But keep in mind on how much damage my fleet is currently taking. If I didn't cripple that fleet as quickly as I did before getting that close of a range, I can very easily see this being a loss for me with the additional health that those Grand Cruisers have, on top of how much more difficult it is to get said critical hits. Since I am at risk of losing 3 of my cruisers right now if I take a good ram hit of some kind. But right now, we're in good shape. This is just about over. Hell, this one ship's about to have a mutiny, the other one's pretty close to having no crew. So I think it's safe to say this is a victory. But it's damn satisfying nonetheless. And like I said, this is a lot of what I like most about these Armageddons and going the Lance Heavy type of fleet. Just being able to instantly, at a moment's notice, when I feel like I can win the engagement, to just suddenly turn in 90 degrees and fire all the torpedoes and ram them to oblivion. It's incredibly satisfying when it works. But it can feel like the dumbest thing when you make the wrong call and get yourself killed as a result, though. Or even worse, if your opponent can dodge them effectively enough. But with the short burn torpedoes at the very least, it's insanely difficult for them to dodge those torpedoes alone, even if they were to effectively mitigate the ram attempt, by either turning their heavy armor to me or just evading altogether.